But in Ruth chapter 1, Elimelech leads to a land of compromise, right? He leads his family into this land of compromise, and we looked at that a little bit, and he gave lip service to God, and his compromise was contagious, right? And others began to compromise as well, and we have some of that. And then Naomi, she became very bitter, and she began to blame and things God, and she kind of repelled people, and she became a different person, basically, during that book and during that chapter. And then Ruth, right? We saw that Ruth, like, she clung to Naomi, right? She clung to hope. And she clung to the people of God, and she clung to the presence of God, and she clung to the path of God, is what we said. And so you can look at that in chapter 1. And in chapter 2, we saw, this pattern for single people, right? We talked about this idea, this pattern for single people as we looked at Ruth and Boaz and some things there. And there was we also got a little bit of a peek into the heart of God, and we looked at the picture of the story of God actually in Ruth chapter 2. And so this morning we're going to jump in here to Ruth chapter 3, and here's the thing: I need to preface this just a little bit because where we're about to go with this, if you grew up going to like Sunday school class or whatever as a little kid, and you had like the flannel graph boards. This is probably not one of those times when the teacher put this story on the flannel graph board, okay? If I had to give a rating for a sermon, right, this would be one of those times that I would probably give a little bit of a rating, and if we had kids in here right now, I'd be like, oh, it's a great time for kids to maybe go to children's church, just because some of the things we're going to be talking about just a little bit this morning in this book, in Ruth chapter 3. And so this morning we're going to look at this, and we're gonna read this chapter, and there's gonna be a part of this story that is gonna cause us to stop and go like, what is going on here, right? We're gonna be like, what is really going on? And there's 4 things that as we read this chapter, I think we need to consider. There's four things that I think we need to consider, and one is we're gonna be looking at some questionable advice. Right, we're going to be looking at some questionable advice that's given. Then we're going to be looking at some really risky obedience, right? Like there's some obedience that's like, okay, that was risky. That wasn't. It's like, okay, well, did that really happen? And then we're going to have a couple of character tests, and then we're going to kind of look at the bigger story a little bit. And so we're going to start off with this some questionable advice. Right? This questionable advice. And so we're going to start off reading in Ruth chapter 3, starting with verse 1. If you have your Bibles open, you can read with me. Ruth chapter 3, verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." So Naomi's like, hey, a couple of months have passed, whatever, since the last chapter, and since that, and she's going, I gotta start figuring out something for Naomi here, and she's coming up with a plan, right? She's coming up with this plan for Ruth, and she's like, I think I got it. I think I got my plan. And so verse 2, she says, "Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours," right? Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor, okay? So she's like, hey, he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Let me ask you this. I'm kind of curious. This is a question I wanted to ask. How many people here, maybe you, your husband, a friend, or whatever, were ever like put together by a matchmaker? Somebody that, was like, hey, I know this guy that'd be perfect for you, or hey, I know this girl that would be perfect for you, whatever, and you ended up meeting the person you were with, or whatever, through a matchmaker, right? Somebody who put that together. That's Naomi in this story, right? She's kind of being a matchmaker here, right? And so that's what she's doing, and she's saying, hey, Boaz is going to be on that threshing floor tonight. And then she says this. Now, verse 3. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Okay. She's like, hey, you're going out tonight, right? You need to get washed, get dressed, take a shower, do those things. Put on some perfume, put on a nice dress, whatever, because you're going to go out tonight. And it would be great if her advice just stopped here. Right? If her advice just stopped right here, it'd be great. Hey, why don't you go out and tonight, whoever, just have some fun, right? Something like that. She continues, and this is what she says: "Go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking." Okay. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, wait, what? what just happened here? What did she just say? What did she tell him to do or tell her to do? It's like, I'm not sure I heard that right? But if you're reading this for the very first time, if you've never read this before and you read this, you're like, what is she telling her to do? Like, this just sounds weird, right? There's something a little off about this. Well, here's the thing. And she's like, you need to go down to this threshing floor, right? And she's like, but wait, because there's going to be, it's like a big payday, right? There's going to be this celebration going on there, basically, is what's happening. They're celebrating the harvest, this kind of stuff. And she's like, there's going to be this celebration. There's going to be eating and there's going to be drinking. And occasionally, on the threshing floor, at this type of an event, there would be prostitutes. Okay? So there would be prostitutes at an event like this on the threshing floor. In fact, Hosea 9:1 says this, "Do not rejoice, Israel. Do not be jubilant like the other nations. For you have been unfaithful to your God. You love the wages of a prostitute at every threshing floor." So it's a common thing that this would happen, that there would be prostitutes on the threshing floors. During this time, whenever they had this jubilant celebration and this type of thing, whatever, that this is kind of what would happen. So basically, Naomi is saying go down there and wait for the guy to get his full belly, right, to get something to drink, to get a little tipsy, right? And then once he does that, go down and watch where he lays down, right? And then sneak over to him and uncover his feet and lay down at his feet. It's like, wait, it's like, what? Like, what is she telling her to do here? Like, what in the world? And can we at least say that Naomi's, gives some questionable counsel at this point, right? Like, we're at least going, I'm not sure that's a smart thing to do. I'm not sure that's really a wise thing to do. The commentators are kind of all over the place when it comes to this, right? Commentators go from this is sinful, that this is scandalous, to others who look at everything through like rose-colored glasses, right? And they're like, well, Naomi was just trusting God, right? That God would take care of the situation. And I'm going, I'm not sure that I believe that. I'm not sure that it was the first or the second, but I believe it's somewhere in the middle, right? There's maybe a little bit of this, a little bit scandalous kind of thing going on, but also a little bit of this maybe trusting God. I don't know. But there's something going on here. But we're not going to sanitize this morning, right? Because this is an interesting part of the story. Not all of her advice is bad, right? Like, hey, get up. Take a bath, put on some perfume, put on a nice dress, like look nice. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think she started out okay, and then she turned the corner a little bit as she started giving some more of her advice there. But here's the thing, but we can also see that she's beginning to turn the corner on bitterness, that bitterness that she had and pessimism, right? It's starting to turn into hope and possibility. She's starting to, like we said last week, there's a little bit of a glimmer in her eye, a little twinkle in her eye now, like, oh, something could be happening here. Like something good might actually be coming our way. Like and she's getting excited about it. I think she's getting a little bit excited about that, and she starts to dream again, and she starts to think of someone else, right? Namely Ruth. She starts to think about Ruth and what's going to happen to Ruth. And I get the sense that she wants Ruth to move on, right? She wants her to move on. And to not allow her past to define her and to paralyze her in the present. That's kind of the sense that you get from this. And some commentators suggest that Ruth is still wearing her mourning clothes, right? That she would still be wearing her mourning clothes, and Naomi is saying it's time to stop mourning and time to move on. Not bad advice, right? That's not necessarily bad advice. But I'm sure that if this is the case or not, I'm not sure, but I think it brings up a really good question. The question is this: am I paralyzed by my past? Right? Am I paralyzed by my past? Sometimes the pain of our past paralyzes us in the present, right? And it keeps us from the possibility of the future. Right? There are times in our life that happens, that the pain in our past paralyzes us, and we can't get past it, and we miss the future then, the things that we're supposed to be doing because we're so focused on the past and the pain that it caused. And I think it's great that Naomi does not want this to happen to Ruth, right? This can happen so easily to any of us. If you've ever gone through a hard time, you know, right, you've had pain in your life, you know that this can happen pretty easily to anybody. It can happen at any time, right? When something hard happens, whatever, in this pain that you have, it can make it very difficult to focus on other things because you're so focused on the pain in your life and the hard time that you've gone through. There's a couple of different ways we can be paralyzed by our grief, right? Paralyzed by our grief. Sometimes our grief paralyzes us and we can't move on from it, right? We mourn and almost think somehow it is disrespectful to move on, right? That it's almost disrespectful to move on, disrespectful to that person, disrespectful to their memory if you move on somehow. And sometimes we get trapped in that. And Naomi wanted her late son's wife to know that it's okay to move on, that it's time to move on. It's time for something else, for the next chapter in your life, right? And this isn't it. Not here mourning and just being with me, that's not it. You need to move on, whatever. And sometimes we can be paralyzed by guilt in our lives, right? Sometimes we can be paralyzed by guilt, and sometimes it's the pain of what we've done and who we were that paralyzes us and keeps us from becoming who we should be. Right? Because there's this guilt in our lives that we just can't get over, and it paralyzes us, and we just stop moving forward. We just start focusing on ourselves and start focusing on the guilt and the shame or whatever it is, and it doesn't allow us to move forward, and we get stuck in that. We get kind of trapped in that at times. Now I think Naomi, again, I think she started with some good advice. Not all of it is terrible advice, right? Naomi devises a plan, and can we agree that it's not the plan that I would advise for my daughter, right? This is not something I would tell my daughter to go and do, right? This is, it's just not happening. I think Naomi starts with good intentions, but she begins to cut some corners here. She's cutting some corners, right? And she's taking a shortcut. Let's consider Naomi's track record for a second, right? Think about this. Naomi went with her husband to Moab, okay? She went with her husband to Moab, okay? Her husband's going, she went. Compromise was there, correct? She did it. Her boys married Moabite women, right? Her boys married Moabite women. She talked Orpah into going back to Moab, right? When you really look at that and you think about what that really means, that she's going to go back to Moab with her family and she's not going to have that relationship with the Lord at all, because she's going to be in that area in Moab, and she's going to be with those people, and she's probably going to do the things that they do and be with them doing all of that. And so she really was turning her back to that. And in her bitterness, she only sees emptiness, right? For a while now, all she's seen is emptiness. That's her track record. That's who this person is. And then in this moment, there's this glimmer of hope, this glimmer of something, right? And now there's this opportunity and yet the problem is she is trying to control the situation. She's trying to control the situation instead of trusting God in this situation. She wants to control it. She's trying to solve the situation in private that should be solved in public. Right? She's trying to solve something in private that should be solved in public. She never mentions God or brings him into this equation. She just tells Naomi, or just tells Ruth what to do and says, wait for him to get drunk, basically, and go and lay at his feet and uncover his feet, and he'll tell you what to do, right? She's not bringing God into this equation at all during this. It's a little impulsive in an effort to solve a situation that is, she misses a step, right? She misses a clear step, at least one, with the closer kin. There's somebody else that maybe they should be talking about other than Boaz. It's a closer kin. She misses that. Leapfrogs right over it, right? And places Ruth in this vulnerable spot, right? She's placing Ruth in a very vulnerable spot. And besides that, it sounds like Genesis 19 with Lot and his daughters, right? We talked about that a couple weeks ago, right? We talked about what happened with Lot and his daughters. And so she's probably was expecting, I think she probably was expecting her daughter-in-law to go and to act like a Moabite. Right? Because that's what she was. I mean, she was a Moabite until she married her sons and stuff, and then she still lived there. She knew their practice, she knew their ways. I think, in a way, she was kind of just expecting her daughter to go and act like a Moabite. I think that's kind of what she was kind of expecting. And here's the thing: she's taking these shortcuts and stuff. And I want to ask this morning: are we taking shortcuts? Are we taking shortcuts in our lives? Right? Is there something we're doing? Are we taking shortcuts in the things that we're supposed to be doing and the things that are important? Sometimes our need to control everything can cause us to cut some corners here and there. right? When we think about it. You ever done that? You ever hey, I know this is where I want to get, this is what I want to do, whatever. I know it's going to take me a long time to get there. If I do it this way, that's probably the best way to do it. But I know if I do it this way, it's going to get there a lot quicker. It may not be the best way. It may not turn out quite the way it should. But you know what? I'm going to do that because I think it'll get me there a lot faster. I think if we're honest, we've probably all done that at some point in our lives, right? I know I have. And so sometimes we cut corners. Sometimes in an effort to be in control all the time, we take shortcuts and we do some things that sometimes we end up just getting lost on those shortcuts, right? They take us off on this path that we never were meant to be on, and now we're off somewhere where we shouldn't be, and we don't know how to get back on the path because we're now in an area where we shouldn't be. The story of the Bible is full of people taking shortcuts, right? When you look at Scripture, you can see all kinds of people that took shortcuts. Abraham took a shortcut to get what God had promised, right? And he ended up having a baby with his servant, and that shortcut has had ramifications to this day, right? There's Tamar took a shortcut and ended up having relations with her father-in-law. Remember that story, right? She ended up having relations with her father-in-law so that she could bear a son and so that she could be part of the family still, because the two sons that she had married, both had died, and the father blamed her for their deaths and wouldn't give her his other son. And so she devises a plan, and she ends up sleeping in secret with her father-in-law and bears him a child. And then when he's like about ready to get rid of her and basically tell her, I don't want anything to do with you anymore, and I'm not going to give you my son and all this kind of stuff, she brings out the staff and this kind of stuff and shows it to him, and he's like, okay, and then he has to accept her into the family, right? And so that was a shortcut. The whole Moabite nation, when you think about it, started because two gals decided to take a shortcut, right? Lot's daughters decided to take a shortcut. And the whole Moabite nation started because of that, and it's not good. Are there things that you have started to listen to God about, things in your life that you've started to listen to God about, but then you quickly decide to grab the steering wheel because you think you know a quicker way to get there, or it's not happening fast enough for you? Are there things like that in your life, right? I think there's times in my life I know that happens, right? That I'm just like, hey, this isn't happening quite as fast as I think it should. I really feel this is what God's called me to do. This is what I think he wants me to do. It's not happening the way I think it should. I'm going to grab the steering wheel here, and I'm going to start driving for a little while because I think I can get us there a little faster. And we're not waiting on God's timing, right? I think if we're honest, we do that, and we do that a lot. And here's the thing, I think there's a couple of principles. Last week we talked about the young adults and some things for singles and stuff. I think there's a couple of principles in here for them too, again. And so for the young adults, right, I would say this: are you looking for a shortcut to God's best for your life, right? And if you know anything about our culture and you know anything about teens and young adults right now, a lot of them are looking for shortcuts. So we live in this society now of instant gratification. Right, you got your phone, you got everything, whatever, everything's at your fingertips. It's like if you want something, boom, I can get it off Amazon today. It'll be here in 2 days. I gotta wait 4 days? What? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. 4 days? No. I got Prime. It should be here in 2 days, right? Like instant gratification. Like we just expect it. Like everything should happen on our time. It should be quick. That's just how it goes. And so there's this idea that we have this in our minds that things should be faster sometimes. And sometimes I think we grab that steering wheel, we take it from God and say, you know what? I'm going to control this. I'm going to get me there a lot faster. Parents. There's parents that are in the room, right? And there's no shortcut to raising kids. Can I get an amen from a couple of people that are here, right? There's no shortcut to raising kids, right? You can't do it. You've got to do the hard work. You've got to put in time and effort to be with your children, to raise them in the way that they should go so they will not depart from it, right? Like that's not easy to do. There's no shortcuts in that. Married couples, right? There's no shortcut to a marriage that reflects the gospel. There's no shortcut to a marriage that reflects the gospel. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes time. And it's a cultivating in your relationship, right? This intimacy in your relationship, and not just the relationship with you and your spouse, but you and your spouse and God, and pointing in that direction. It takes time to do that, and it takes hard work. It's not easy all the time, and there's no shortcut for it. So as we move on, we're going to look at some really risky obedience here, right? We saw the questionable advice from Naomi, and now we're going to look at Ruth's really risky obedience, in my opinion. So verse 5 says this, "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And I'm thinking, okay, like, where's this going, right? And then it says this, it says, "When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits," pretty sure I know what that means, right? Good spirits. He was tipsy, right? He probably had a little too much to drink, maybe. Like he's in good spirits. He's happy. He went over and lied down in the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and she lay down, right? And it's like, okay, wow, this is risky. Like, think about it. This is risky. She's putting herself in a very vulnerable position. Naomi put her in this vulnerable position. This is very risky. Like she's going in and she's lying down. And personally, I think there's several things going on here. First, I keep in mind that Ruth is a young believer. Okay, she's a young believer. So she's not a mature believer. She hasn't, and so she's a pretty young believer, and she's not been following God for that long, and she has connected her journey to Naomi. Right? The same one who told her to go back to Moab. So that's who she's connected her journey with. And now Naomi, I think, is telling her something that is very risky, and she's listening to it. And here's the question. Who is listening to me, and what are they hearing? Who's listening to me, and what are they hearing? In your life, right, and the things that you're doing, and the things that you're saying, who's listening to you, and what are they hearing? Is there someone whose relationship with God is tethered to you? Like Ruth was with Naomi. Is there somebody whose relationship with God is tethered to you? Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's whatever, and they look up to you as kind of like their spiritual adult, right? It's kind of like you're the spiritual leader for them, even if they maybe aren't part of your home, they still see like that's the person that I get my spiritual advice from. What are they hearing, right? What are they hearing from your words? And what are they hearing from your life and the way you're living it? Are they hearing risky advice? Questionable advice, risky behavior? Are they hearing that kind of stuff from you, or are they hearing what God wants them to hear through you and through your life and through your words? What does the things that you're doing, what do they say, right, to them? What are the things that here's the thing, what are the things that you're not doing say to them? Right? There are things that, as believers we should be doing. Right? Reading our Bible, praying, doing things like that, like just being kind. Like if there's somebody who's tethered their life to yours, and especially their relationship to God with yours, and they're with you and they're hanging out with you and stuff, and you go out to a restaurant and you're there and your food comes and you're like, this isn't quite what I ordered, and you're like, I need to get that waitress and I need to have this change, and the waitress comes and you're like, hey, you know what? This is not right. Like, this is not what I ordered. Can you get this fixed? Or, you got an attitude with them or whatever, and then you're complaining about it the whole meal, and at the end you're like, I'm not tipping that person what they deserve, what I normally would, because, man, they didn't get my food right. Like, I had to wait a little extra time for it. And you're complaining, is that the right thing? What are they seeing in you? Right? Our actions speak volumes to other people. And if somebody has tethered their relationship to God with you and go and think of you as kind of that spiritual mentor for them and that kind of thing, and they see you behaving in those ways, they go, oh, that must be okay. What are they hearing from you? What are they seeing in your life? Parents, what are your kids seeing in your life? When they watch you on a regular basis and they see because here's the thing, parents have one of the greatest influence on their kids, right? Yeah, they go to school and teachers have some influence, that kind of stuff, but parents are the ones that have the primary responsibility for raising their children and for being the example that they're supposed to follow. It doesn't matter what happened in your past. Doesn't matter what you've done in the past, because that's not the important thing. The important thing is, who are you right now? How are they seeing you? What are you doing, and how are you leading them? Right? That's the idea. When they're looking up to you, what are they seeing in your life? Are they seeing someone who honors God with his life or her life? Are they seeing someone who is following God and doing the things that he has called them to do? It's a good reminder to some of us that not all counsel is good counsel, right? This is a reminder to all of us that not all counsel is good counsel. There are people out there that may tell you things that may sound kind of good, and when you start to put it into practice, you're like, wait, this is actually really bad. This isn't really good advice. And I think this speaks to Ruth's character, right? I think this situation, I think it speaks to Ruth's character, because she is committed to Naomi, right? We know that. We know that she's committed to Naomi, so it speaks to her character in that way. And she was a woman of her word, but I think more poignantly, it speaks to what she knew about Boaz. Right? I think it speaks more even to what she knew about Boaz, that Ruth was willing to go and do this. Because I think she was willing to take the risk, no matter what Naomi may have been thinking, right? I think Ruth was confident that Boaz was a man of character, and that and we will see that actually as we continue looking at this in the next part of the story, that he was a man of character. I think Ruth understood that when she went in there and she went to that threshing floor and she uncovered his feet and she laid down there, and you remember Naomi's advice, he'll tell you what to do. I think she knew he's a man of character. And I think she realized that. And so I think there's a couple of things here. And so the next section here, we see these. There's a couple of character tests in this next section. Right? We're going to see some character tests here. And so a test of Ruth's character, but maybe more importantly, a test of Boaz's character. Verse 8 says this: in the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Okay, what? Could you imagine? Could you imagine being Boaz at that moment? Okay, you've been eating, you've been drinking, this kind of thing, and now all of a sudden there's a woman laying at your feet. Okay, I know we have ourselves a little situation here, right? A little situation. We're like, okay, what's going to happen? I mean, our minds could probably run wild on everything that could possibly happen in this situation, right? There's all kinds of scenarios that could happen here, right? You got a beautiful girl, smells good, looks good. You feel good. You've been drinking. You've got, you just got paid. You're like, it's in the middle of the night. Nobody would know, right? It's in the middle of the night. Nobody would know. And who would blame me, right? These could be all the things running through Boaz's mind at the time, right? This is easily things that he could have been thinking. Who would blame me, right? I mean, she was there, and, well, I was there, and what was I going to do, right? You got this whole thing. And remember what Naomi said. He will tell you what to do. I'm thinking, yeah, I bet he will, right? Are you kidding me? That's the advice you give to this young girl, to go and to lay down and to do that? That's, wow. That's some questionable advice. I mean, here is the real test of character, right? There's no situation, there's no circumstance, like I said before, that you could even come up with that I'm telling my daughter to go and do this, right? This is not some situation I would put my own daughter in, that's for sure. And so we've got this advice, and here's the thing, again, there's no one watching, and no one, he's probably no one would blame me, and it was her mother-in-law's idea, right? He could be thinking, hey, it's her mother-in-law's idea, and the other guys down here on the threshing floor, they're kind of all doing it too, right? They're doing things, so what's it matter, There's all kinds of things, and look at this. Boaz doesn't tell her what to do. Instead, here's what he does. In verse 9, he says, "Who are you?" Who are you? He asked, I am your servant, Ruth, she said. Right? She's like, I'm your servant, Ruth. He's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Ruth. Right? And so he asked her a question. He doesn't tell her what to do, but instead he asks, who are you? Who is she? He wants to know who this is. And here's the thing. I think this comes to a great point. It makes a very good point here, is this. Do I see people as objects? Do I see people or objects when I look at a person? Right? Boaz, he's not seeing an object. He's seeing a person. He's saying, who is this? Who is this person at my feet? Not just, oh, there's a beautiful young woman at my feet. It's, who are you? He's asking that question. Boaz saw a woman with a story and a name, not just an object and an opportunity for a good time. He saw a woman with a story and a name. And so Boaz isn't looking for a good time. He's looking for a wife. That's what he's looking for. He's not looking for a good time. He's looking for a wife. And men of character will see women as people, not objects. Right? Men of character will see women as people, not objects. This is one of the major effects in our society. When you look at our society, this is so harmful to men and women alike, and it's pornography. It's rampant today. Like young men and young women that are seeing this stuff all the time, and it teaches them that someone of the opposite sex is an object to be had instead of a person with a name and a story. And it can become very damaging to the psyche of a young man or a young woman after they've viewed things like this. It can become very damaging to that, and it makes relationships so much harder in the future because they've gone down that road, and it has changed the way you think about things and stuff like that, and it's awful, and it's part of our society. It's something that is affecting so many people today. It literally will rewire your brain in a lot of ways from the habit of looking at it. It's not good. And it makes them objects of our desire. When we see a pretty body, right, and make lewd comments, we are seeing objects, not people. When we stare at pictures of body parts, we're seeing objects, right, not people with stories. Remember Boaz in chapter 2, he calls her daughter and recognizes that she is someone else's daughter. Right, he recognizes that. He recognizes that, and it's like when I think about that, that's how we should view someone, right? Guys who are looking at a girl or whatever should recognize that is someone else's daughter. When you start to think that way, it can help you to break some of those cycles and start thinking like, hey, that's the way what I'm thinking right now is not good. Like that is somebody else's daughter. Well, I want somebody else thinking of my daughter that way. But problem is it's so rampant and it happens so much, and it's the same for both men and for women, right? In today's culture, it's actually, it used to be that, long time ago it was more prevalent in men, that kind of stuff. It's now the scales are becoming much more balanced in this, where it's both men and women that are victims of this. Let's look at Ruth's response. She says this. She says, "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." This is an interesting statement because she's referencing Boaz's prayer to her that we saw in chapter 2. She's referencing Boaz's prayer that we saw to her, to this. He said to her in chapter 2 when she says this, right? Because in Ruth chapter 2, verse 12, it says, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." She's referencing this, right? And I think what she's saying is, she's saying, Boaz, I want to know if you're willing to be the answer to your prayer, right? And if you're willing to be the instrument of God's provision and protection for me, by paying the price required to be my redeemer and choosing to be my wife, for choosing me to be your wife, choosing me to be your wife, right? Like that's what she's asking. When she's saying this, that's what she's asking. Boaz told her in chapter 2, he wanted her to find refuge under the wing of God, and now she is saying to Boaz, I am wondering if you are willing to be the answer to that prayer that you prayed. Right? That you said that's what you want from me, and I'm asking, are you willing to be that? And that's what she's doing here. And so again, I think she went into this knowing that this is a man of character and that he wants the best for her because he told her that in chapter 2. And so she went into it, I think, in a different way than maybe Naomi thought, right? That Naomi maybe had some other plans of things she thought might happen, whatever. But Ruth, I think, knew this is a man of character, and I'm wondering, is he willing to redeem me and to do that as our kinsman redeemer? Here's the question out of this, right? Am I waiting for God's answer to my prayer? Am I waiting for God's answer to my prayer? We talked earlier about how, sometimes we like to grab the steering wheel, right? And then take control and do it on our own, right? And just take our own way. Sometimes we have something and we're just like, I don't know when it's ever going to happen. Are we waiting? Are we willing to wait for the answer to our prayer, right? And that's a good question, because Naomi didn't seem to add God into this equation, but Ruth wants to. And so she reminded Boaz of his words to her. She reminded Boaz of what he said to her. I am looking for refuge under the wing of God and wondering if you're willing to be his instrument, is what she's saying to him. Ladies, again, young ladies in our culture, right? I think what we should be asking is this: are you willing to wait for a husband who will be the answer to God's prayer for your life? Are you willing to wait for that? Are you willing to wait for someone who will lead you like Jesus leads? Someone who will love you like Jesus loves? Someone who will commit to you like Jesus is committed to you? Someone who is willing to make you beautiful inside and out? Those are the questions that I think. So I've dealt with so many teens over the years that have come to me and they're in relationships and that kind of stuff, and I'm going, it's a bad relationship. Like they're just with you because of probably the way you look, maybe they enjoy hanging out with you a little bit, but there's a lot more going on here that's not good than is good. And they're not someone who's following God. They're not someone who is going to love you like Jesus loves you. They're not someone who's going to, lead you closer to Jesus. They're someone who's going to take you probably farther and farther away from that than you ever want to go. And for the guys, right? For the guys, they don't get off the hook on this, right? Are you willing to wait for a wife who will be God's answer to his prayer for your life? Are you willing to wait for that? A woman who will be a helpmate like God intended her to be, in the way that God intended her to be. A woman who will encourage and support and compliment you the way that God intended her to. Right? Are you willing to wait for that? Because I think there's so many times people are like, man, I'm single. I feel like I should have a boyfriend by now. I should be dating. I should be doing these things, whatever, because everybody else is doing it. And man, I'm getting older and I don't want to be alone and all this stuff. And so they rush into something that they know is probably not the best fit for them, that is not the person they really should be with. And they make all kinds of excuses, right? I know, but he really loves me. He really, he cares for me. I can tell because he treats me kind. Okay, but does he love Jesus? Is he leading you closer to Jesus? If not, it's not a good relationship, right? That's not how God has intended it, right? That's not what we're supposed to be doing, right? We're supposed to be connecting ourselves to someone who's leading us in that way, because that's what God's roles are for men and women. The guy's supposed to be the spiritual leader in the home, and if he's not willing to lead you when you're dating, he's not going to do it when you're married. Verse 10 says this: "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Listen, this doesn't say, "Wow, you're good looking," right? That's not his response, right? He doesn't look at it and go, "Wow, you're good looking," right? You know what I mean? He doesn't say that. He's probably thinking it, right? It's in the back of his mind. He's probably thinking, "Wow, she's very attractive," right? I'm sure he noticed, but he references her noble character. That's what he references. He references her noble character, her substance. He references that, and it's the same word that's used in Proverbs 31, a wife of noble character. Who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Right? He recognizes her worth and her value because of her character. Right? He's like, everybody in the town knows that you're a woman of noble character. You have proven yourself to be worthy. Here's the question I think that some of us need to ask is this, and this is for everybody, not just young people, but is my beauty only skin deep? Is my beauty only skin deep? Is that all anybody sees? Is that it? Like what's on the inside? Boaz recognizes her character, and he references that she could have chased younger men, right? She could have done that. She could have chased younger men. She could have chased richer men, apparently. But she didn't. She didn't do that. You want to know why? You want to know why she didn't do that? Because character attracts character. Character attracts character. If somebody has character and I have character, that's the person I'm attracted to, because you know what? I want that for my life because I know that that's important. It's important to me. I know that's important to me, and that's why I have good character, and that person has good character. Character attracts character. It does. Character also strengthens character, right? My character strengthens my partner's character. What am I doing to make my character beautiful? What am I doing to make my character beautiful, to attract someone, especially if I'm a younger person, whatever, what am I doing to make my character beautiful, to attract someone with the type of character that I'm looking for? But even not just for younger people, what am I doing in my life in general to make my character beautiful? Right? Am I doing the things that God's called me to do? Men, what do you do to encourage the beauty of your wife or your girlfriend for their character? What do you do? What do you do to encourage that? Are you encouraging them, or are you constantly just at odds with them? Right? What's the relationship look like? What are you doing to encourage them and to encourage their beauty and their character? What are you doing to encourage that? Are your words kind? Do you speak to them kindly? Do you do things for them? Go out of your way to do things for them? When you're around others, do you speak more kindly to other people than you do to your own wife or your own girlfriend? Like what does that look like? Because that's not okay, right? If that's never okay, right? That's not how it should be, and that doesn't promote good character. And that in men, in men, what do you do to encourage the beauty of your wife? But then ladies, what do you do to encourage the strength of your husband or boyfriend's character? Right? What are you doing to strengthen their character? Are you speaking kindly to them? Are you doing things for them? Are you being nice to them? Are you treating them well? Are you respecting them? Right? Those are things that when you do, and we're going to keep reading here. Verse 12, although it is true that I am the guardian redeemer of your family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until the morning. So it would have been easy for Boaz in this situation to just cut some corners. Right? It would have been easy for Boaz to just cut some corners of his own and to take a shortcut. But he knew that there was somebody else that's a closer relative to Naomi, to Naomi and Ruth than him. And so he's like, there's somebody else. And he's choosing to do the right thing and to do that first. And so this other person would have had the right to choose first before him. And he knows this. And he's like, I can't just jump over this person, right? Instead of doing the easy thing, Boaz decides to do the hard thing and to not ignore the hurdles that seem to be in the way. He doesn't just ignore them and go, hey, you know what? Yeah, I know there's somebody closer in kin, but I'm not going to mention that because I'm just going to do this thing because it's going to be easier that way, right? He doesn't ignore that. He doesn't do that. And here's the question. Do I do what is easy or what is best? Because here's the thing. Not always is what's best the easiest thing to do. Can everybody agree with me on that? Like, sometimes to do what's right and to do what's best is the hardest thing to do. It's not the easy way. It's not the easy road. And so sometimes in life, you've got these choices. You're like, I know this is what's best for me, right? But man, that's a tough climb to get there. Boy, that's going to be hard. There's an easy road over here. It's not quite going to get me there, But it'll get me close. It's a lot easier. I think I'll just take that way. And let's be honest, it's easy to do in life, right? It's easy to do that in our lives. No matter what stage of life we're in, this applies to us, and it's so easy to just cut corners in the things that we're supposed to do. If the person you're with is not willing to do hard things, then and they're not willing to do the hard things before you're married, what makes you think that they'll be willing to do those hard things after you're married? Right? For young people, that's something they need to think about. If they're not willing to do the hard things before they're married, why would they do it after? If they're not willing to overcome hurdles before you're married, why would they be willing to overcome hurdles when you are married? Doesn't make sense, right? But too many times people ignore those types of signs. They get into a relationship and they end up getting married, and then they regret it later because they go, man, this person they don't seem like they really want to work for this. They don't want to do anything. And it's like, well, they didn't do it when they were dating. Why would they do it when you're married? Like, what were you expecting? Right? It's unfortunate that happens, and that's why the rise of divorce in our country is so high right now. And here's the thing. Here's the real kicker. It's just as high among Christians as it is among non-Christians. That's a sad fact. The percentage is the same. I'm like, that is insane to think about that. Like, but it's so common these days. And part of that could be because people of the culture, they don't even get married. They just live together, right? No need for a divorce if you just live together. Makes it easy. It's the easy way, not the best way, the easy way. We'll just live together. Then we don't have to get divorced. If something happens, we just say, oh, we'll just go our separate ways, right? So I think that actually affects some of the stats or whatever when it comes to divorce in our country. So here's the thing. So next verse is this. So she lay down at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could recognize, and he said, no one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor. He was concerned about her purity and her reputation. He recognizes this is a woman of noble character, and I don't want to do anything to taint that. So nobody should recognize who you are, right? Nobody should know that you came to the threshing floor. And here's the thing. Here's the question for us, right? Am I concerned about others? Am I concerned about other people? Boaz is concerned for her. He wasn't just thinking of himself in this moment, right? He was thinking of her. And he's like, I care for her, and I don't want her to be, tarnished in any way. And the question is this, am I concerned for others? Am I concerned with protecting the purity of others? Am I concerned with protecting the purity of others? That definitely has, in relationships is something that we need to look at, right? And in the person you're with, are they concerned about protecting your purity? They should be. If they're in a relationship with you, they absolutely should be. And here's the thing, again, as a youth pastor, I dealt with a lot of teens. And so when they get into these relationships, they would always come to me for some relationship advice. They never usually liked my advice too well, but that's another story. But they would come and they would be like, hey, I'm in this relationship, and I just, things got a little whatever the other night, and I just don't know, like. And here's the question they almost always ask: well, how far is too far? Right? They want to know how close to the line can I get before it becomes a problem. So many of them, that's how they think, right? They're like, how close to the fire can I get before I get burned? And I think that's the wrong question. And I would always tell them, like, listen, that's the wrong question. The question is, how close can the two of you come to Jesus, right? How much closer can the two of you get to Jesus? That's the question you should be asking. What can we do in our relationship that gets us closer to Jesus, not each other? Because if the two people in a relationship, if they both get closer to Jesus, that, especially if they do it together, that's going to bond them together for life. That's going to build a relationship that's going to be stable and it's going to be firm because they did it together and they got closer to Jesus. They weren't worried about, where's the line at? What should we be? No. Stay away from the line. Do what God asks you to do. Get closer to Him. Do that in a relationship, and He's going to bless you so much for that. Verse 15 says this, he also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing. So she's got a shawl around her. He's like, bring me the shawl you're wearing and hold it out. When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed a bundle on her. Then he went back to town. So he says, hey, give me that shawl you're wearing. And he pours 6 measures of barley into it. And I love this, right? He fills this shawl. And here's the thing, and I looked this up, like, it's like 80 pounds of barley. Remember last week where we talked about the fact that she was carrying, some grain home, whatever, it was like 40 pounds, and I'm like, she's walking all the way back home with 40 pounds of grain? Like, I don't even like carrying the 40-pound bag of water softener into my house, right, from my truck to my house. Like, I don't even like doing that. But here's the thing. I also don't like having to do it twice, so I will grab 2 of them and take them at one time, and it's about all I can do to grab both of those things, 80 pounds worth of water softener salt, and carry them into my house and sit them down beside the water softener. And by the time I get there, I'm like, oh, that was ridiculous. I wish these things weren't so stinking heavy, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Here she is. She's like taking 80 pounds of grain, and he places the bundle on her, and she's like putting it on her back, and she's walking back home. I'm going, she's a worker, right? She's not a wimp. This is a woman of noble character who's not afraid to get her hands dirty. She's willing to work and do the necessary things, and that speaks volumes to her character. Speaks volumes to her character that she's willing to do that, right? And she's doing that because she's trying to provide for herself and for Naomi, right? She's willing to do those things, and that's that relationship. Well, if she's willing to do those things in that relationship, how much farther is she willing to go for someone like Boaz and in their relationship? What will she do for that person, and how much will she be willing to do in there? So that's something, again, when you're thinking about the ideas of relationships and stuff like that, is things that we need to consider. And here's the thing we need to consider: am I a giver or am I a taker? Am I a giver or am I a taker? Right? Do I give life to others or do I drain it? Boaz was a giver, right? He gave her 80 pounds of grain and says, here, take this too. He could have just quickly been like, hey, get up, get out of here, right? Go. Right? He could have just done other things that night and just skipped everything altogether, right? But he was a man of character. He's a giver, not a taker. And he gives her 80 pounds of grain and says, here, take this too. Don't leave empty-handed. Here, take this. He goes above and beyond again for her. And so the question is, am I a giver or am I a taker? Do I give life to others or do I drain it? Really, we have to ask ourselves that question. Do I give life to others or drain it? Do my words put life into them or drain them of life? When I'm speaking to people, do my words give life to them, or do they drain life from them? Do they frustrate them? Do they aggravate them? Right? Or do they just depress them? What am I pouring into other people's lives? What am I pouring into other people's lives? What am I doing? Like, how am I pouring into other people's lives? Because here's the thing, we should be pouring into the lives of others. That's what we're called to do, right? If we're disciples of Jesus Christ, if we're called to be followers of Christ, to be his disciples, we are called to be disciples that make disciples, right? We should be reaching other people. We should be devoted to doing that, to pouring into other people and helping them understand what God has for them and what's best for their life and how not to cut the corners in their life or whatever, to do all those things, whatever, but what God has that's in store for them and what's best for their life, we should be doing that for them. We should be doing that for others. I know I've talked to you guys before about find 3 people that you know that maybe don't know the Lord or whatever, and you're praying for on a consistent basis. And you're praying for God to open up the doors for you to be able to talk to them. And when they do, when that door opens up and you are able to talk with them, what are you pouring into them? What are they hearing from you? Are your words giving them life? And here's the thing. For husbands and wives, right, this starts at home. This starts at home. Husbands need to be affectionate to their wives. They need to be affectionate to their wives. If you're not being affectionate to your wife, you're not in a good relationship. You're not doing what you're called to be doing as a husband. You need to be affectionate to your wife, building her up, helping her to build up that beauty inside of her, right? That character inside of her. It starts at home. Husbands need to be affectionate to their wives. And wives, they need to use kind words, right? They need to be kind and gentle with their husbands. They need to respect their husbands. They need to respect them as the spiritual leader in the home and allow them to do that. If the man is not the spiritual leader of the home, doesn't mean that the woman should be. It means the woman probably needs to help the man understand, you need to be the spiritual leader of our home. That's what God's called us to do. And men, you need to do it in an affectionate way. And women, you need to do it with kind words and love your husband and respect them the way that they deserve. And when you're doing those two things, right? When the husband's being affectionate and the wife is being loving and kind, when those two things are happening in a home, it makes for a harmonious home. It makes things run so much better. Everything becomes much easier. Because when it's not, then there's the bitterness, there's the strife, there's all this stuff, whatever. Everything just becomes more complicated. Everything just becomes harder in the home, right? It's just how it is. Any relationship is that way. Verse 16 says this, starting in 16 says, when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" I'm sure she's wondering, like, hey, the advice I gave you, like, how'd it go? I'm going, do you really want to know the details there, Naomi? Like, really even thought that through? Like, so anyway, it says this, then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. And here's the thing, that's where the story's going to leave us for today. But you can see, like, there's a lot going on here, right? Naomi and Ruth, Naomi had her little plan. She gave some very questionable advice to Ruth. Ruth followed through with some risky obedience, but I think it's because she knew Boaz, she knew his character, and she was willing to put herself in that vulnerable position because she knew the man and what he was. I believe she did that. And I believe God has blessed her for that. We're seeing that here. And Boaz said, I will do what you've asked, but there's somebody else that we need to talk to first. Like we can't just jump over these hurdles. We can't just pick the easiest route here and just do what's easy. We need to do the hard things, and we need to have a conversation with somebody else. And we're going to see that a little bit next week. And here's the thing. I think there's also this idea. There's the bigger story that we need to look at real quick. The bigger story that's going on here. This story of Ruth reminds me of a bigger story of God that points us to God's bigger story at play. Right? The Bible says that just like Ruth, who was poor and vulnerable and a foreigner, right, with no way to redeem her situation, that we too need a redeemer to pay the price that's required for us to enjoy the blessing of being forgiven and being part of God's family. Just like Ruth. That's who we are, right? It's who we were until we were saved, until we were redeemed by Jesus Christ, right? And here's the thing. Jesus is the Savior who refused to take a shortcut to pay for our redemption. Do you remember the garden? Remember what happened in the garden? Right? Jesus in the garden, Jesus asked if there was any way, please show me. Was there? No. There was no other way. Did he go, all right, well, let me figure something else out, right? No. Yeah, he asked. Nothing wrong with asking. Is there a better way? Is there another way, some other way that's just as good that can work this out? If not, you do what he did, right? He was willing to do it. He said, show me. And there was no other way that was presented. And so he faced the cross for our redemption. He did that hard thing for us. He didn't cut corners. He took the responsibility to pay for our sins and to purchase our freedom and to give us the right to belong to his family. He did that for us because he cared for us and because he loved us so much. Ephesians 1, verses 4 through 7 says this, in love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, in accordance with his pleasure and will, to the praise of his glorious grace, which he has freely given us in the one he loves. In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he lavished upon us. It's not because of what we did, right? It's not because of what we did. It's all about what he did. It's about the grace that he shows. It's about what God did by sending his one and only son to die on the cross for our sins. It's about the fact that son, that Jesus Christ, did the hard things. He didn't try to figure out a different way. He didn't try to call down legions of angels to get him off the cross. He didn't try to do anything else. He said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do what I know I need to do to redeem these people because I love them that much, and I'm going to do it for them. What a picture of God's grace. And what a picture for us in relationship with others. I love them so much that I'm willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice for that person. I love them so much that I'm willing to do the hard things in this relationship to make it work. Because I believe that's what God has called us to do. What a picture, right? The bigger story of God is this idea of salvation, right? That we can be redeemed just like Ruth, right? This poor, vulnerable foreigner who had no way of redeeming herself was redeemed. It's amazing to think about what Jesus Christ did on the cross for us and how he redeemed us. So this morning as we leave here, I want us just to think about this a little bit and think about what does this mean for me? How do I live this out in my life? Whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in a relationship with a girlfriend, boyfriend, whether it's just in relationships with people in general, just friends, family, whatever. Like, what does this say to me and how do I live some of this out? How do I be the person in the relationship that points to God in my relationships? That is the person of character that's going to bring out the character in others. The person of character who's going to attract that kind of character. How do I do that and how to do that in my life today? That's the question that we all need to ask ourselves. And how do I, and maybe we're going, I'm doing a pretty good job of that. I think I'm doing pretty well. Well, the question is this, how can I do better? Because there's always ways we can do better. There's always ways we can do better. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, right? None of us are perfect. There's always things we can do better to point to Jesus in our relationships and in the things that we're doing. Let's pray. Father, just thank you so much again for this opportunity for us to be here this morning, to look at the book of Ruth and just to think about this fascinating story and just how you used this story to really speak to us in so many different ways about the redemption of us and how you love your people so much. And Father, I thank you for Ruth and just this story and what she went through and all of that, Father, just so that we can understand your love for us in a much greater way. And Father, I pray that as we think through some of this stuff, as we think about what this means for our lives, I pray that you'd help us to be better in relationships, to put you first and to make sure that our relationships and the things that we're doing are God-honoring and pointing to you all the time. Father, I pray that you would help us not to cut corners, not to get impatient and things, and to grab the steering wheel and to try to take things into our own control, Father. We've seen how that can go so horribly wrong, and probably a lot of us have experienced it. And Father, I pray that you would help us to avoid those pitfalls. I know it seems easy at the time, but Father, we know that that's not what you've called us to do. And I pray, Father, that as we do that and as we continue to grow in you and continue to be more and more like you, Father, I pray that we would go out from here and we would share that with those around us. That we would be disciples who make disciples, people that are going out and pouring into other people, helping them to know what's best for their life and helping them to see that Jesus Christ is what's best for their life. And if they give their lives to him, that their life would be so much better in so many different ways. That they would have a hope and